Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of the 21 and Sensory podcast with me, Emily. I have special guest Sara Gibbs. Sara is a UK-based comedy writer, graduate of the National Film and Television School's Writing and Producing Comedy course, and also a prolific tweeter. Her credits include Dead Ringers, The News Quiz, The Daily Mash, College Humour, The Now Show, The MASH Report, and Have I Got News for You? So she clearly has a lot going on. Sara was recently diagnosed as autistic and has a new book out called Drama Queen, One Autistic Woman and a Life of Unhelpful Labels, which is described as a memoir of a woman's life that didn't make a lot of sense until she was a third of the way through it. So we are clearly going to have so much to chat about. So would you like to say hi?
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
No worries. I realise that I always do like very lengthy introductions and then like the person can't really introduce himself. So I've like said everything.
That's very autistic. You're waiting for your moment to introduce yourself. By the way, I'm Sara.
Hi, I'm here. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on. It's really kind of you to have said yes. And yeah, I thought maybe we could start off with like discussing your diagnosis of autism. I always find it fascinating to understand people's kind of process and the timeline from kind of thinking they might be autistic to actually getting a diagnosis. So would you like to kind of explain where that sort of started?
Yeah, so I have a cousin who she is I believe she is self-diagnosed, but I don't know if she is definitely autistic or not. She she suspects she might be at this point, and she also has an autistic son. And she we didn't grow up together, so I didn't know her very well, but later in our lives, later, we're not 80, but we started getting to know each other, and I went to her son's birthday party, I think back in 2016, and afterwards she sent me a message and she said, I really hope you don't mind, but I think you might have Asperger's. And I was like, I don't really know what that is. But I all I really knew about autism was sort of Rain Man. And I thought that being autistic meant you were really good at maths or, robotic or unemotional, all those things that are these, I guess, media autism stereotypes. And so I just sort of dismissed it out of hand. I was like, haha, no, I don't have that. And then I sort of thought, well, she must be a bit weird. And that was that. And then I saw her again at a family party. And this time, a few days earlier, a really close friend of mine had been watching a Chris Packham documentary about autism and had said, a lot of what he describes is kind of like how you describe how you experience the world. It's weird. I think, have you ever looked into whether or not you have Asperger's? That's what people were saying at the time. Okay. And I was like, oh, for goodness sake, I do not have Asperger's. Like, why does everyone keep saying this? It was, and then I bumped into this cousin a few days later, just out of coincidence at a family party, and she watched me sort of stimming, tapping my nails on the table and squinting in the light, and I had this very bright yellow floral dress on when everyone else was dressed really chic and classy, and she just said, you're autistic, right? And I was like, oh, this again. Look, no, I'm not, because I can talk to people and I can make friends and I have loads of empathy and I'm really rubbish at maths. And she was like, yeah, that's movie autism. And she just sat me down and explained to me how autism can present in girls and women. And I was half listening because I was like, I don't like this. I don't like being diagnosed at the dinner table.
Yeah.
And I, there's a lot of internalized ableism and a lot of stigma still. And in my mind, she was insulting me. I was like, what does she mean? Like, she's saying that I can't feel love. What does this mean? And she just said, look, please let me just send you a checklist. Okay. And it's Tanya Marshall's checklist of, again, now outdated terminology, but young girls with Asperger's and women with Asperger's, and see if it just makes any sense to you.
Okay.
And so I thought, well, I'll read it if it gets her off my back. And so I read it and I was like, oh no, oh, this is spooky. This is like someone's followed me around and has written up a profile specifically about me, not about like a condition or something. But this is eerie. It's like someone followed me around from childhood until now, making notes. And then I took the Aspie quiz online, and I scored quite highly with a very neat little seashelled shaped graph that I was very pleased with because it was symmetrical, which I think it tells you a lot in itself.
Yeah.
And I was one of those people who was so incredibly privileged and lucky, because I know how hard it is to get a diagnosis. But my husband has work health insurance, which extends to me, and they weren't supposed to say yes, but they did. Someone accidentally said yes to me, and they tried to take it back. And my husband was like, "No, you promised her."
Yeah.
So they said yes to one diagnostic appointment, and I managed to get my diagnosis just a month later.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
great. That's really nice to hear. Nice that you didn't, like, after having all those people like almost like badgering you to be like, I think you are this, to then not have to wait too long. That might have been like even more difficult to be like, am I?
Yeah. And I appreciate I'm very rare and lucky.
But then it's nice to hear that for once, that someone hasn't had to wait, and that you could make, you know, if you have health insurance, like, use it, kind of thing. Like, that's a perfect example of it. And it's really interesting to hear that it wasn't something that you had picked up on, or even like your other half. Like, it was other people, like, slightly removed from you in terms of like being close relatives and stuff. And that must have been like really hard to hear, like people trying to almost label you, and you hadn't really come across it before.
I think because I didn't know what it was. I think if I'd known what autism was, I would have known I was autistic straight away. But I think I had masked so hard, especially with my social difficulties. And there'd been so many times when things had gone really wrong in my life, and I would go into a state of sort of denial about it. And, you know, I was fighting really hard to be seen a certain way. I wanted people to see me as competent and socially adept. I didn't want, you know, I felt like I'd left behind that childhood self that couldn't make friends, or if they made friends, couldn't keep them, or, you know, the teenage self that you know, got called inappropriate all the time, and you know, got excluded from things, and the young adult self who got fired, not fired, but I would say constructively dismissed, or at the very least, you know, my probation was extended, and I was very much shamed out of my job, my first job, and that was a horrific experience. And so I had worked so hard going, no, this time, like, I've had this fresh start in comedy, and I'm doing well, and people have limited exposure to me, so they don't have time to find out I'm broken, or whatever's wrong with me is wrong with me, and I'm hiding it so well. And I felt like someone had like found out that I wasn't doing the social thing the way that I was supposed to be doing it. And I was like, how do they know? I've been like, what's the point? I've been working so hard to hide it. So my first reaction was just sort of shame, like, oh great, I've been found out again.
Yeah. Oh, that's really difficult. Like, because I know how much effort masking is, and how like hard it is to like keep at that front constantly, and especially like social stuff and like social occasions. Like, you know, you're trying so hard, and it just the way you're saying, like, I was kind of found out, like, I totally relate to that. Like, as soon as people kind of suggest something, you feel like they've sort of found you out somehow, and they're trying to kind of push you into kind of a corner of this sort of like label. But have you found, like, in a way, like some stuff from kind of like your past has like fallen into place in terms of like how you were and like how you behaved and stuff like that? Like, have you found that like since having the diagnosis, you've been like, that's why I do this and stuff?
Everything fell into place when I got my diagnosis. Just everything I've ever done or thought or felt or said or got wrong or got right, just, you know, I say, you know, often it's a blueprint for who I am. So there's no, in my mind, separating me and, you know, my autism, as people put it. It's just, everything has to make sense through this lens, because that's who I am. So yeah, it was the first I mean, even now there are still moments where I go, oh, that's why I did that thing. I mean, all moments are like that, but specific memories where I'm like, how did I not know? But yeah, the first year and a half was just like this frenzy of re-examining my life from this completely different perspective. It's a bit like watching a TV show where they leave little Easter eggs throughout, and like a comedy show like Arrested Development that's very famous for leaving like little clues as to things that are going to happen in future episodes, and when you rewatch it you find them, and I sort of felt like I was rewatching and finding all the Easter eggs.
Okay, that's such a good way of putting it, like just all these little things that you didn't realize just like popping up and being like, oh, we were here all the time. It's frustrating. I totally get that. But it's hard to be told by other people that you're something when you don't see it yourself. So it's really interesting to hear your perspective on that. And I always find it really fascinating to hear how people come across or like stumble across the whole autism thing. And you're right in saying that there's this portrayal in the movies of how it is and the kind of male sort of side of it. And I totally get that would have been your only impression of it before you kind of read about it, and like people told you about how it kind of presents in women and stuff like that. And I think really that kind of has to change for us to kind of see it more in women and for us not to be so late diagnosed.
Totally. And also that's why I'm patient with people who don't know anything about autism or who say things that to a trained ear sound horribly ableist, but like you only know what you know. And I don't think it's helpful, especially for newly diagnosed autistic people, or people who think they might be autistic, that the second they enter the community and say a wrong thing. I mean, that happened to me. I was so excited when I was first diagnosed. All I wanted to do was talk about it. Yeah. And the way I talk about things is I write about them. And I guess because I had a little bit of a platform already, I'm not by any means, and I'm certainly not now famous, but I had a small following on Twitter, and I had some credits on TV shows, and so I had access to writing in public, and that's obviously a dangerous thing when you're not quite immersed in the community for a long enough time. And I thought it had been a long enough time because it had been a few months, and I thought I'd read everything there was to read, and I was so wrong. And I remember the first thing I did was say I was high functioning. Obviously I now don't think of autism in those terms. I think if people are listening to this, they're probably quite familiar with autistic stuff, but if anyone is listening and they're not, there's a move away, and I certainly feel this way, from the linear model of thinking about autism as a spectrum of mild to severe. I think it's much more I guess apt to say it's like a spiky ball with the spikes being different lengths for different people, or a visual slider with the sliders being turned up to different things. We all have maybe the same set of traits, but we experience them to different degrees. When I first got diagnosed, I had this sort of imposter syndrome-y feeling about my diagnosis anyway, because my whole life I've been working so hard to hide my difficulties, and people really thought on the surface of things that I was incredibly capable, hardworking, and I am in many ways. I obviously I wouldn't be able to do what I do if I wasn't, but I think I needed people to see me a certain way. And then the diagnosis, I was like, oh, I don't have to hide this anymore. Yeah. Well, am I going to hide it? What am I going to do? And I started trying out telling people I was autistic. And one of the first people I told burst into tears and said, my relative is really severely autistic and he's never going to be able to live independently, and what you're saying offends me. And I was like, oh my God, I'm appropriating this term that's meant for someone else. I'm so sorry. I'm so embarrassed. Obviously, I'll call myself high functioning from now on. I'll qualify it. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And, when you're autistic and you're used to a lifetime of people telling you that what you said is inappropriate or wrong or bad, you're trying really hard to please everyone. So I was like, right, well, obviously I meant to call myself high functioning, and that's what my doctors have called me, and that's what seems to be the right medical term. And so I went straight out of the gate, wrote a piece in a very public forum calling myself high functioning. And the first response was, wow, ableist much? And I was like, what? What do you mean? How could I be ableist? I am the thing. I don't understand. Yeah. And then obviously, nicer people explained it to me a little more gently. And obviously, it's not that person wasn't nice. I'm sure that they were just fed up of, years and years and years of people just getting it wrong, and I understand that. But I think my own experiences have taught me to be a little bit more patient with people who are just new to the language, new to the community, and just need to be gently told, actually, we prefer to speak in terms of support needs rather than functioning labels, and this is why. And usually it makes sense to people. And I guess if they still insist on the functioning labels after that, then maybe we got a bit of a problem. But most people just don't know.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Like, most people just don't know, and especially if you're new to the community like you were, like, this is the thing that I always say, like, after your diagnosis, like, you're very new to the whole autism thing, but actually, in a way, you're not, because you've always been autistic and you've lived your life as an autistic person, and you have that kind of life experience of, like you said, like masking and stuff like that. So you've always been autistic, but you just didn't know, and you're new to it in a sense of trying to understand your own kind of autism. And like you said, other people, like, yeah, there's people who, I get what you're saying, like they're more severe or like, less capable of living independently and stuff like that. And it's difficult because everyone with autism is very different and no one is the same. And, for that person to compare you to, someone who is, it's difficult. I don't know how to say it without, like, this is the thing, like, without saying it in terms of like a spectrum or like mild to severe and stuff. So I get what you're saying about, being picked up on things, because sometimes it's really hard to describe it without, offending someone or something or a movement. So I totally appreciate that. It must have been very kind of, I don't know, scary to write about it, but it's important to write about it and to be corrected. And like you say, to, hopefully encounter some nicer people who can say, actually, I think you've got that bit wrong, and to take that on board. Like, you're learning, everyone's learning.
Totally. I think, it is really hard because I don't want to tone police anyone. And like, I know that there are really malicious interests out there who are, they're not just learning, they're deliberately being unkind or disrespectful, and that's a totally different thing. And I think that people who've come across that a lot, they have every right to feel jumpy about it. But I think the internet doesn't help. And I think it's with all marginalized groups and all groups in general. You get into your group and you get into this language and you forget that being new can be scary and bewildering. And especially when you're autistic and you spent your whole life feeling that social rejection. Imagine you're like, oh, finally, I found my people. And they're like, no, you've got it wrong. Get out of here.
Oh, that's really difficult, especially because, like you say, you have like this following already, and you want to share that this is something you've found out and it's important to you. And I just appreciate the fact that you were open about it. And it's great to see like more women, not like coming, like I heard someone say like they were coming out, like autistic, coming out, and to see like a professional like woman and see that they are where they are and they're autistic.
Yeah. And, I think it's interesting that we talk about like living independently earlier, because I think what was confusing for me at the time was like, I was saying I was high functioning for the benefit of the people who said, oh, you're nothing like my relative. And actually, I couldn't live independently. My husband is my carer. I have a chronic pain condition alongside being autistic. And obviously being autistic means that you either feel pain in a very extreme way or you don't feel it at all often. Like there seems to be two extremes in the way that people experience pain when they're autistic. And for me, I experience pain in a really extreme way, minor pain and discomfort. I can't ignore it at all. And so I have this chronic pain condition, fibromyalgia, and also I'm insulin resistant. So, when I have a blood sugar drop or a pain flare up, I can't do anything for myself at all. And my husband pretty much does all my life stuff. He makes all my meals. He works from home. He looks after me. And, he does all the housework. He's like a 1950s housewife in terms of, this is the labor that women have been doing for men to allow them to succeed for centuries. But, he does that labor for me, and I couldn't live independently. at this stage. And so it is weird for people to go, oh, you talk, so you're high functioning. It's like, well, I don't know what that means, because obviously my support needs are relatively high. They're not high. Like, I don't need someone to dress me, and I don't need, I can go places by myself and things, but they, in terms of my day-to-day living, my support needs are mixed and relatively high.
Mm-hmm. I think people don't realize that, like, from the internet, they get this side of you that's like, oh yeah, you can function, you can talk, you are successful, within your industry and stuff like that. And actually, they don't realize that without you saying that, that actually you do, like, rely on someone else, and someone else does care for you. That actually people don't realize you don't get the full picture from the internet. You're never gonna understand someone's complete life from, like a few tweets or, like, some posts on Instagram. Like, I don't know, people get a picture of you from that, I think, and that can be dangerous.
It is a bit dangerous. I know I'm not supposed to name search, but I did, because it was like the day after my book got released, and I wanted to see everything everyone was saying. Just, I'm human, and curiosity got the better of me, and I know it's not a cool thing to do. And I know you're supposed to pretend that you don't read reviews and you don't care, but I do read. I read every single one.
Yeah.
Because I like knowing what's going on. I'd rather know than not know. And I think there's always this fear that what if someone says something really unfair or libelous about me, and I'm not across it, and like, so the control freak in me needs to read them. And I did see people having a discussion about me. And they were basically saying that it was after a piece came out about me and two other authors who have books out, autistic authors. So I will shout them out now because it seems like a good moment. So Joanne Lindbergh, who's written Letters to My Weird Sisters, and Eric Garcia, who has written a book called We're Not Broken. He's an American journalist. And so I was in The Guardian with them on this sort of feature about all of our books, and it was lovely and exciting. And the feature used functioning labels, which was unfortunate because I did spend a long time explaining why they're not helpful. But sort of surrounding the quotes about why I was saying they're not helpful, it was like, and Sara is high functioning. I was like, no. No. But I think that got a few backs up, and that wasn't nice, because that was beyond my control. And then I saw people having a discussion saying, another piece about successful autistic people. They don't care about the rest of us. They don't care how hard life is for us and how lots of us are unemployed. And I just felt horrific. I felt like, oh, am I taking up space? Like, should I not have... because obviously when you're promoting a book, you are going to take all the publicity you can get. Of course you are. Like, you're human, and you've written a book, and you have publishers relying on you for an income and a team and people working on it. And you don't want to let people down, and you want your book to do well. So I did the interviews, and suddenly I was going, was that wrong of me? Should I be turning these down and saying, you need to be talking to other people? Should I have signposted other things more? Should I have done more? And I felt, and then, so when this stage first felt guilty and awful and burny and terrible. And then I felt a bit angry because it's like, these people don't know my life or how much I've struggled to get here. I sort of felt indignant. I was like, I wrote this book through enormous chronic pain. I dictated bits of it in the dark, and I crawled out of bed on days where I could barely open my eyes, and I wrote my 1,000 words, and I crawled back to bed. And it wasn't. I think they see maybe some of my tweets or nice headshots that have been done by a photographer, and they don't see the day and a half of sobbing in bed after the headshots because I was just so overwhelmed, or any of what went into making this successful, on the outside, making it look successul. So it's frustrating because you sort of feel like, oh, I need to perform my struggles. I need to show everyone. And well, actually, I shouldn't have to. Like, people should just take my word for it.
Exactly. Just because you're seen to be coping on the outside doesn't mean that, at home or on the inside, or, your mental health and stuff like that isn't being affected. And it's actually like kind of, I don't know, it's like nice to hear that, after having your headshots done, it wasn't something you could cope with, and you had to like go and like process it and get upset about it to kind of move on, because that's something that I can really relate to as an autistic person. Is, you know, it's not easy to go out into the world, do a thing, and then, you know, come back to your own environment and feel okay about it. Like, it's hard to process these things sometimes, and that's what people aren't seeing. And I always find that really frustrating, because, you know, if you're seen to be doing well, you can't possibly not be coping. Like, why is that a thing?
Yeah, and I do think sometimes about posting, you know, the aftermath. And then I think that doesn't feel fair to like the wonderful photographer and hair and makeup person who came here and did such a great job. I do think about it. And then I think, I just worry that people that I work with will interpret that as me not having enjoyed working with them, or, you know, that they'll feel guilty in some way that they might have overwhelmed me. And obviously, that's the last thing I want, is for people to feel like they've. It's the last thing I want is for people to feel like they've upset me in some way, or that they've been responsible. So, yeah, it's a balancing act, and also, you know, I don't want to have to post my trauma or my most vulnerable moments for people to understand me, you know.
A lot of it is quite personal and quite private, and like you say, like, you don't want to offend anyone, or you don't want people to like read into your stuff and like apply it to themselves. Like, if you've spent, you know, the day with them or something, like you were saying, like your colleagues and stuff, like, it's really difficult, because there's a fine line between like talking about stuff and like people taking it the wrong way kind of thing. And actually sometimes you just want to share bits of your life and not, you know, have people take it like as, you know, them. I don't know, you just don't want people to be offended by things. And I've had that as well. It's definitely like scary.
Absolutely.
So I was going to ask you, like, what, like, about your book, and what was kind of the process between kind of getting your diagnosis and then deciding that actually, like, you wanted to write a book? Like, what was the kind of like time frame, but also what was like your sort of process?
I think the first year and a half after my diagnosis, I went into this, I like a cocoon phase. Like, I just isolated myself from the rest of the world. I just stopped. I quit my business because I just felt like I was having a breakdown of my identity right after my diagnosis. You know, there was some euphoria, and then there was, well, who am I then? Am I just a walking checklist? And does this mean that I have always been getting things wrong my whole life? And does that mean that I'm always the one who's wrong in social situations? And what does this mean for me? And I stopped trusting myself, and I stopped trusting my relationships and my perception of my friendships and everything. And I just withdrew from everyone and everything. I stopped seeing people, you know, I stopped communicating with people, and I just went into this little bubble. And I was burnt out and depressed and not really coping. And just slowly, I think there were just people in my life who were just not having it, and new people as well. Like, this is around that time that I met my narrative comedy writing partner, Simon. I mean, I already knew him a little bit, but I really got to know him in this time period where I was isolated from everyone else, because he just sort of made such a big effort with me and kept checking in with me and engaging me in work stuff. And I think my friendship with him and a couple of other people stopped me from falling off the edge of the earth a little bit. And it was sort of rebuilding these friendships and making new friendships with my autistic identity incorporated into that really brought me back to the world. It was, you know, lots of moments of kindness, like people making a special effort to come and see me, or a friend riding several stops out of her way on the tube with me to make sure that I got on the right connection to get home because she knew I was overwhelmed, and lots of little things like that. So I started to sort of come back to the world. And around that time, I sort of looked around me and I was like, what's happened to my career? I was still doing rooms and stuff, but nowhere near as much as I was. And I hadn't been going for stuff in the same way. I had just sort of shrunk into myself. And I started thinking about what I wanted to write now. And around that time, I sold my first script, which was an autistic comedy, which didn't go anywhere for a variety of boring industry reasons. But it was sort of, that was one way of processing everything. And then I remember just feeling like I really wanted to write about autism, about my autistic identity. And I wanted to write about it in a way that was funny and accessible. And I started thinking about what I wanted to write. And my initial ideas were sort of a series of personal essays rather than a story about me. Just like the first idea I had was a book called How to Be Autistic. And then just as I was about to pitch it, someone released a book called How to Be Autistic. And I was like, damn it. That happens all the time. You just have a great idea and someone else has the same great idea, and that's that.
Yeah.
And it was suggested to me by a colleague that I was the story, and I sort of felt uncomfortable because I was like, I don't know, I'm a writer, I'm not a performer, and I'm very used to being behind the scenes, and I like being behind the scenes. I don't really like being front and center or the center of attention. It's not, I feel quite uncomfortable with it. But they said, no, your story could help a lot of people. And I think it's really interesting and engaging because I grew up in like a new age community as well. So there's all this other stuff going on. Then very, very quickly, the idea got pitched to Headline, which is my publisher now, obviously. I met Sarah, who is my editor, and she was so enthusiastic about the whole thing and so understanding and compassionate. And I just felt like, this story's going to be in safe hands. I think she's the right person for this story. And I just tried not to think too hard about what it would mean to have all of my most, vulnerable and embarrassing and private moments be so public, and for, potential to hurt my friends and family and all of that. I had to just put that aside and write and be like, well, that's a problem for tomorrow, Sara. It wasn't an obvious or intuitive thing, but I'm really glad I did it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I've seen so many good reviews about it, and so many people saying how they can kind of relate to it and stuff like that. And it must have been really scary, like you said, to, kind of I don't know, bear all and kind of put your life out there for others to see, because that's, again, quite a private and personal thing. But I think it's really important that, I don't know, there's more books like that out there. And it's difficult, like what you were saying about, someone getting to your idea first, and the whole How to Be Autistic kind of idea. I can totally understand how that would have been a good title and things like that.
Yeah, it happens all the time in writing. It happens all the time that you come up with the idea and then it comes out a week later, or it's just, you've just got to have lots of ideas. You can't be the writer with one idea.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it's interesting to hear about someone who's gone through that process, and it's really nice that you had really supportive editors and publishers and stuff like that. That's great to hear that they've been behind you and really supportive, because I appreciate that, I don't know, some people might just not get it and not understand the ins and outs of, all the complex things that might have gone on in your life, and maybe the accommodations that you might appreciate and stuff like that. Did you find that writing to you had to write to a deadline, and were they kind of flexible at all?
I'm sure they would have been, but I was a month early delivering.
Excellent.
I'm that kind of autistic. I'm the teacher's pet. I wanted to get it done. I wanted to get it done well. I wrote it in small increments, maybe 500 to 1,000 words a day, depending on how I was feeling. But the most important thing was just to make sure I was writing every day. And that got even harder when the pandemic hit and everything went weird and nobody was working. People were just stopped because it felt apocalyptic. But actually it was quite good for me, because it meant there were no distractions and no going out and then coming home and being exhausted and having to have a day off the day after. It was just all I had to do was write. They were really flexible about accommodations. I recorded my audiobook from home with a producer who I have already worked with on other things and have got a close relationship with. And so they let me have that, which was, I know they might have just said, no, you have to use our people, but they were really accommodating and flexible about all of that. And, my PR person at the publisher is amazing. I say my PR person, she's everyone's PR person, but I think of her as mine because she's so closely working at the moment, but she's absolutely incredible. And she has just gone into bat for me, with TV producers and all these things. Sara will be wearing her sunglasses on air, or she's going to have her camera off for this, or whatever else I needed at that time. She's been the one, and same with my agent as well. I'm surrounded by really, really, really good people. Before big meetings, like my agent will always make sure to check in with me, that I know what's going to happen, that I'm prepared for who's going to be on the call. And then, I don't know, we had a really big important meeting a few weeks ago, and she just texted me beforehand and said, "I've got you." And I was like,
Oh,
it's just so nice to be looked after by the people you
yeah.
work with in that way, and for them to understand that you are someone who needs a little bit more looking after than most people, and a little bit more explaining, and for everyone to be so patient and nice to me. It's been really lovely.
That's really nice to hear. Like, just that someone else has got your back and you're kind of going into battle with someone else. And it's not just you on your own. And that's great to just like, that's all you kind of want, is just someone to just like pre-talk to you before a meeting, just to like, just double check you know what's going on. Like, that would be so helpful in just life in general, let alone like, like book PR and stuff.
Yeah, I came into this meeting and she goes, "Right, I'm on this Zoom meeting and I'm going to let the others in a minute, but like, it's just me and you now. Are you okay?
Oh.
Like, have you got, she really gets it, my agent. She's really wonderful and nurturing, and really, I feel very much like she's got my back. And I'm, I never have to overly explain or convince her of anything. I'll just tell her if I'm unhappy with something. She understands immediately why, and she's just there, and that's lovely. But luckily I'm not unhappy with things too often. I mean, I've been so lucky with my publisher, and I have had projects which have been autism related, where people sort of, I think in a really well-meaning way, tried to translate the experience of being autistic to a way that neurotypical people can understand. And I think what they don't understand is that there isn't a neurotypical person underneath being hidden by these autistic behaviors, that, there's no way to explain this in a way that's going to be satisfying to neurotypicals, because there's not really an explanation. It's just, we are how we are. But what happened with my publishers was, they just, I don't want to say they got out my way, that's not right, but my editors really let me tell my story the way I wanted to tell it. And the edits were light, and they were more like, I think we've got enough anecdotes about this, or, we only need one analogy, or I'm not sure that this is a universal reference, or things like that. So, but at no point did they try to edit my experience into something that it wasn't. And I know that should be as it should be, but that's often not the case. And it was so refreshing and so wonderful to be trusted to tell my story like that.
Exactly. That's great. Like, it's great to hear that you've been given that kind of room, and that, like, I was going to ask you, how have you found like the PR and the surrounding like articles and interviews and stuff like that? Like, I know you mentioned about like being able to wear sunglasses on air. Like, it was so awesome to see that. It's like, it's such a like simple accommodation, but it makes such a difference to, like, because I can imagine like lighting and stuff like that in a studio environment is very, like, it's a lot to deal with.
Yeah, it was a lot, but I think it has been overwhelming, but I'm not complaining. I think I've had more publicity than I could have ever dreamed of, and I know that I am incredibly lucky to have landed with such an efficient and effective PR, and incredibly lucky to have so much interest in the book. So there's no complaints. But as an autistic person, of course, when you're doing several interviews a day for weeks on end, you do start to get a little bit worn out and exhausted. And there's also the social anxiety afterwards of, oh God, did I say that thing? What did I say? Was it bad? Was it bad? And like, when you think about it in terms of like your regular social anxiety, that's a lot. But when you throw into the mix that someone is going to, A, widely listen to this, B, maybe reinterpret your words in a way that you didn't quite mean. And that does happen. You'll talk to, like, everyone I've talked to has been super nice and super well-meaning and, really good. But like, there've been moments where I've read something and be like, I don't think I said that, or I don't think I meant it like that, or that's been taken wildly out of context. And of course, moments when, maybe newspaper articles have taken the most salacious moments of the book and put them front and center because they're the most interesting angle for a newspaper piece, but they remove all the context and nuance. And you're like, oh, are people just going to think, like, are they just going to think I'm like, I've just said this terrible thing, or, that without all this surrounding context and build up and explanation that humanizes what's being said. So there's a lot of anxiety about being misrepresented and not having control over things, and which photo are they going to use, and ruminating over stuff you said afterwards. So yeah, it's not an easy process, but I would rather have it this way around. I think I would have been devastated to release the book to silence. That would have been so much worse.
Yeah, exactly. At least you've got that kind of that like platform within your like your own social media, but also that you have been able to get out there and really kind of push it, you know, across like radio and TV interviews and articles and stuff like that. Like it's the best way to kind of grab people's attention, I think, as well as, you know, I imagine that you want autistic people to read it, but you also want people who aren't autistic to read it, to just gain an understanding of your life and how life is for people with autism. So I think it's great that you've done so much PR. Like I've seen loads of different PR from you, and it's really great, and it's like really interesting to hear like what people ask you. I think that's kind of why I wanted you like on my podcast as well, to be like, oh, I just want to like quiz her on all these things. But like it's really interesting to hear what like people pick out, and like you say, like news articles picking out maybe like, you know, quite not like juicy bits of your life, but like bits they think are going to be interesting and enticing to people. Like that must be difficult to think like, I don't know, people are doing that with your kind of story, but I guess that is PR, isn't it?
It is, and obviously it's tough because my dad passed away, and so, you know, I've written about our relationship in quite a lot of detail, and there are moments in my childhood where I say I felt afraid of him, and those moments are very much in context of wider things in the book, and we had a very loving relationship, and I loved my dad very much, and so it's hard for me to see, you know, often in most interviews, it sort of gets distilled out into this, you know, my dad being not monsterized. I think there's still empathy for him, but the context of why I said those things isn't there. And so I worry about, like, you know, have I tarnished his legacy, his image? You know, not that he had some big legacy. He wasn't like a famous person or anything, but, you know, just that he existed, and that, you know, I'm telling this story from my perspective, and, you know, is this how people are going to remember him because of things being taken out of context, or things being taken? There's a lot of anxiety and the weight of responsibility of that. And also you do as an autistic person, and I guess any minority, you end up becoming like a poster girl or like a representative for your people, in a way that, like, you know, if you are, I guess, a cisgender, straight, white person, you probably aren't, like, you know, able-bodied, abled, you probably aren't expected to speak for all white people or whatever. But you know, when you have anything, you know, I'm Jewish as well, and I find the same thing with my Jewish identity, is when people expect you, they sort of think of you as a spokesperson. They expect you to be all things to, you know, all autistic people or all Jewish people. And it's like, no, I can only just be myself, and this is just my story, and I don't feel comfortable with people generalizing it to that extent.
Just the fact that you think that you have to live up to all these like different identities, that I can understand why you feel that. And like, you know, I think it's only natural to like overthink like what parts are being kind of, you know, brought up in the media and stuff like that. So it's really interesting to hear like your experience with it all, and I don't know, like the pros and cons of, you know, talking about your own life and publishing a book and stuff like that. It's just interesting. It's interesting to hear. I was going to ask you, have you found that you've been able to kind of see things that interest you as like kind of special interests? Because I know that that's like, it's kind of like an autistic kind of term or like thing that's kind of said in the community. Like, do you find like, has comedy been like always like a real like passion for you and stuff like that? Have you kind of picked up on that like after your diagnosis at all?
Yeah, I think I've had quite a few special interests in my life. I have some that have been, you know, consistent throughout my life, like writing, and others that come and go, like music and singing. And some TV shows.
Yeah.
The Australian soap opera Neighbours pops to mind. It doesn't pop to mind. It's always in my mind, taking up a big portion of my mind. If you looked at a pie chart of how much of my mind is taken up by the Australian soap opera Neighbours, I think you would be astounded and disturbed. Yeah, definitely. In comedy, comedy is something that I've loved since, we didn't have a TV growing up. So it was really when in my early teens we got a TV. I think in my maybe just tween years or early teens. I can't remember exactly how old I was, and I just devoured things like The Simpsons and Friends. I was like, what is this thing that they're doing? And everyone's laughing, and and I think I learned what funny was supposed to look like from shows like that. But I don't think I ever thought of myself as funny. And I don't think I ever thought of myself as someone who could be funny to other people.
Okay.
And so it was sort of, I hit a bit of a wall in my life in my late 20s where I was like, what am I going to do now? After my dad had died, and the business I was running had sort of fallen by the wayside because I'd been caring for my dad, and I didn't really feel like going back to it because it was wedding blogging, and I didn't like seeing all the happy brides being walked down the aisle by their dads. It was too much for me, and I tried to go back to it, but I'd lost that felt like from my before life, and it didn't feel like it fit me anymore. And my wedding blog was quite twee, and it was quite a, I guess like, I don't know how to put it, quite a saccharine industry, and you had to have this saccharine image, and I didn't feel like that anymore. I felt angry and raw, and I wanted to express myself in a new way. And for a couple of years I did some music with a friend, and we ended up in this YouTube band. She's quite a famous YouTuber, and she does like special effects, makeup, and all sorts of stuff. And she has a wonderful singing voice. So we ended up in this band for 2 magical years that were completely bizarre. But again, it just wasn't quite for me. It was just something that I needed to do in that moment in my life, because music was something I did with my dad, and it was my way of processing my grief. And then after that came to a sort of a natural end when we'd done the thing and we didn't really want to carry on doing the thing. I just didn't know what I was going to do next. I found myself in my late 20s and going, okay, I'm nothing. I don't have a career. We don't have children, and we don't have, like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do now? I don't have an identity. I don't have anything to do. My husband, who is wonderful, he just said, like, take a month off. Just don't think about what you're going to do next. Do your freelance work or whatever, but just take a month off thinking about it, and you will go away on a little trip. And at the end of it, you can we can think about what you might want to do. And it was during that time I started obsessively listening to Tina Fey and Amy Poehler's audiobooks and watching 30 Rock and Parks and Rec. And I think somewhere in that time, I just brainwashed myself into thinking, yeah, I can do this. And I did. Then I found the NFTS, which is the National Film and Television School, and I found their comedy course, and I thought, I have to get into this course. Like, this is this will change my life. This is my life's mission. And I was right. My intuition about it was right. It completely transformed my life, and never looked back. Comedy was my calling, really.
That's amazing. That's so cool to hear. Like, it's really interesting to hear your journey, and like, I'm definitely a big believer of, like, sometimes you just need to try things out and, like, do something for a bit to know that you've done it and you've given it a go. And, just like with your singing and stuff like that, like, it's nice to have the freedom to try things out and think, I've done that. And, like, it's nice that you found that kind of goal of, I want to get into this course. Like, I'm going to do this course. Like, that's nice. That's nice to hear that you had, like, different, like, kind of, like, sets of, like, goals and things you wanted to try. Like, I think it's really important to be creative in life, but also to just give things a chance. And it's interesting to hear of, like, all your different special interests as well. Like, I love that Neighbours is, like, a thing that really excites you and takes up, like, a portion of your mind. I totally get what you mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to say that I saw that your book is, like, a #1 bestseller on Amazon. That's so cool.
Oh, yeah, that was exciting. I mean, it's the Amazon charts. It's not the Sunday Times charts, obviously. And it's, like they're more niche charts than like, it wasn't global or anything. Doing that thing where I'm like, oh, it's nothing, I'm trash. But it's a really strong and exciting start for a debut hardback. I think, it seems to be selling well and people seem to be enjoying it and recommending it to their friends, which is really nice to see, and really engaging with it in a passionate and curious and excited way. And that's so lovely as an author, when you spend so much time alone with a piece of work, and then seeing it out in the world and seeing it in the wild and seeing people respond to bits of it or relate to bits of it. That makes everything worthwhile, because for the longest time you're like, what am I doing this for? Like, it feels like no one's ever going to see it, and then suddenly it's like flowers blooming, it's all come alive, and it's a really nice little honeymoon period for me. I'm enjoying it a lot.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. Like, I can imagine, like, it's weird because it's something you've been so close to for so long, and it's something that's been very personal to you, and then you've just kind of let it go out into the wild, and like, just trying to, like you said earlier, like, you don't want to search your name, but you totally do want to search your name and like see how like, I'd be the same. I'd be totally curious to see what people were saying, and like, I don't know, I think that's all you kind of want in life, is like just to know like feedback on things that you've done and put out there, and it's kind of a natural process, isn't it, to want to know how things are doing.
Totally. Yeah. And I don't understand authors who say they don't name search or read reviews. I mean, I understand why for their mental health they might do that, but I don't understand how they actually stick to that. That seems like saying like, oh, I never eat chocolate. It's like, come on.
Yeah,
a little
exactly.
bit. A little bit every now and then.
And I saw, because I follow you on Twitter, are you launching your own like podcast? Is that like, because you're talking about like different authors?
Yeah, so it's going to be a limited series, so it's not going to be an ongoing thing, because I just don't have those kind of spoons. And I've already I've only contacted maybe half my list and realised, okay, that's a lot of books to read, mate. Like, you might want to do this in 2 parts. Slow down. But yeah, it's called Aut Hour, but spelled like author, but with an extra U. And I was so proud of that title. I felt so smug, because it's an hour-long interview with autistic authors. And I was like, oh, bravo, Sara. You're never going to come up with anything better than that in your entire life. And then my brain went, oh, have you accidentally plagiarized that? But I've looked it up and I can't find anything with that name. So hopefully not. So if you do have a project called Aut Hour, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It is not on purpose. I honestly do believe in my own, like, whatever moment of genius. Like, oh, what a name.
Yeah.
Well done, me. But no, it's going to be, I think what I really want to do is shine a light specifically on other autistic authors, because I just think that, we are riding this wave at the moment of interest in autistic own voices, stories. And I think people want to hear from authors about their own writing process and their own work, and all our works are so different. And I always find myself wanting to ask questions and compare our experiences and chat about the writing process. And I just thought, well, why not do that in a structured way that promotes all of their books? And I'm sure that they don't need my help, but I guess every little bit of publicity helps. And I'd like to do my little bit to, put more autistic art out into the world.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think that'll be great. I saw you mention it, and I was like, oh, that, it's immediately something that I thought like, oh, that'd be really interesting to hear, like, you as an author chat to other autistic authors, and like you say, like, compare and contrast, like, how, I don't know, how you got into the kind of like publishing world, and also your own like experiences living with autism and things like that, and kind of like, comorbid conditions and stuff like that. That's something I find like really interesting to chat about, and I think it'll be a really interesting podcast. I totally get why you want to do it as like a limited series, because podcasting is a commitment. Yeah,
it really is. And I've got so much else on at the moment. I think, I've got something, I've got like 6 projects on desks right now.
Oh, wow.
That are, that are in consideration for different things. And I think this is just like, I might have bitten off a little more than I can chew, but I'm going to do it anyway, because that's I don't know. Maybe I hate myself.
It's difficult to say no though, isn't it? When you're like really like interested or like passionate in a project. I'm like that. I'm like say yes to everything, and I'm like, oh no, this is going to take up way too much like mind power, but I'll do it anyway.
I am at a point in my career now where I've had to start saying no, and it's really hard because my people pleasing instincts kick in, and I want to say yes to everything, but I can't say yes to everything and everyone all the time because I have nothing left. So I have to start being a little bit selective, which is not a nice feeling for an autistic person to be like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't help you.
It's hard. Like the thing is, I think you've got to have your own time and your own space, and you've got to protect your own mental health and like avoid burnout as much as possible. So I'm kind of learning as well that like you're going to have to say no at some point, and there's only so much like one person can take on, whether they're autistic or not. And, having the autism on top of everything else is, makes juggling stuff quite difficult. But it's nice to hear that you're also like, you find it hard to say no as well, because I don't know, you just feel like you're disappointing people, but actually I'm sure they'll understand.
Yeah, it is hard. And especially when it's, I don't know, when it's someone who, like the worst ones is I get a lot of people contacting me wanting help. They've just found out they're autistic, or they found out their kid's autistic, and they want what they need is a counsellor, and that sort of service just isn't available. Yeah. And I'm not qualified to help. I'm not qualified to give advice on how to cope with this process. I can only talk about my own experience, but like I feel a big weight of responsibility talking to somebody I don't know about, like, it just doesn't feel appropriate. And so I have to say, I'm so sorry, I can't give you advice on that because I'm not qualified. And then I feel so mean because like my instinct is to want to help, but like I feel like I would be doing more harm than good by pretending to know what I'm talking about something that really I can only talk about from my own lens.
That is difficult. Like you said, you're not a professional. You are, obviously someone with lived experience, which is, hugely valuable, but you can't help everyone. And that's difficult as, being someone in the public, like you are, like people are naturally going to think you might be able to help them. And like, you're openly talking about these things. So that must be really difficult to kind of get that sort of sense of like separation.
It is hard. And I've recently sort of shut down all my public DMs just because it got a little bit overwhelming. And it wasn't that I didn't love hearing about people, but I didn't know how to respond because it was like, anything I say is now irresponsible. Like this is now a sort of a safeguarding issue, but it's just an issue of ethics. And, I think that I need to have some boundaries for myself as well, and have, people be able to, like, if people want to contact me for work stuff, all my agent's details are online, so I'm not too worried about missing stuff like that. Like, I'm always happy to hear about work opportunities or things like this, like podcast invitations or anything like that. And I love hearing about people's stories, but I can't get into a long, intimate back and forth because it feels irresponsible.
Exactly. And you can't be there for everyone. You can't be available all the time. And you have your own life to lead at the end of the day. And I'm sure it would take up so much time responding to all these different people. And like you say, there's the kind of ethics and all that around it. So I think, like you said, like shutting down your DMs and stuff like that is probably like for the good, and hopefully like things like, podcasts and stuff that you are doing where you're talking to other people and stuff, that's another way people can kind of learn from you. So it's not like you're totally like shutting off like all your like experiences and stuff like that. Like you're just doing it through different mediums.
And, when people contact me in public on Twitter, I do try to answer wherever I can. I'm not always able to. I don't always have the spoons. I don't see all my notifications either because that would just be overwhelming. But, I do try to be accessible where I can, but I can't always, like you said, I have my own life. And like the other day, I had 3 separate friends go through crises on the same day. And I felt a responsibility to be there for them. And, there's only so much of me to go around. And it is tough. It is tough because you do want to be there for everyone, but you can't, there's only one of you, and also it's sort of arrogant to assume that like, I'm the only person who can help these people. I'm not, and I probably can't.
And like you're saying, like a lot of the time you see that actually someone like a counsellor would they benefit from someone like that rather than, a back and forth conversation with you kind of thing. So no, I think that's a sensible outlook to have. And where can people follow you online, and where can people buy your book, most importantly?
So I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Sara_Rose_G. So that's Sara no H _Rose_G. And yeah, same name across both platforms. So I'm more active on Twitter and occasionally on Instagram when I remember. I've only just figured out how to do stories, and I felt very proud of myself when I was like, oh, music, you can put music. That's exciting. And you can buy my book at pretty much any good bookstore. If your independent bookstore doesn't have it, you can ask them to order it in. I'm sure that they will for you. People have been so great about that. And also, if you fancy doing a sort of guerrilla marketing tactic and getting your local bookshops to order a bunch of copies, I'm not going to discourage that either. Obviously, you can get it at places like Amazon and Waterstones and Foils and online, and it's available in audiobook format and Kindle format. So yeah, I tried to make it as accessible as possible.
Amazing. That's so great to hear. Like, I love that you did your own audiobook as well. Like, I always think it's lovely when like authors do their own.
It's hard to listen to. It's like,
I find that as well. Like, if I listen back to my voice, I'm like, oh, I sound like that.
Oh, you sound great. So,
thanks. It's always just like weird to hear a recorded version of yourself, I find.
It is. It's not how you imagined yourself in your head.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, thank you so much for giving up your time to chat to me. It's been really interesting to hear about you and your life and your work and your book as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, this is a lovely podcast, and I'm really honoured to be on. So thank you.
Thanks so much.